Human beings have always lived between two worlds, the visible world of forms and the invisible world of inner experience. Osho reminds us that consciousness is not a static element, but a living mystery, a river whose depths remain unknown even to those who believe they understand themselves. To speak of dimensions of consciousness is to acknowledge that awareness has layers, some dense and rooted in survival, others subtle like fragrance. Most people move through life without ever questioning the nature of the one who sees, thinks, or feels. Yet the very act of questioning opens the door to dimensions that lie beyond the habitual patterns of the mind. This exploration invites us to look inward, not as analysts dissecting a problem, but as seekers willing to witness the unfolding of being. The 12 dimensions described by Osho are not mere psychological categories. They are landscapes of experience that reveal how perception, identity, and existence itself transform as awareness deepens. With each step inward, the familiar dissolves, our certainties weaken, our assumptions become porous, and the boundaries we draw around ourselves begin to blur. What emerges is not new information, but a new way of being, a recognition that reality is shaped by the depth from which we perceive it. To enter this journey is to accept that consciousness is infinite, that no map can fully contain it, and yet maps exist to inspire movement. Osho's description of these dimensions serves as a lamp for the inner pilgrim. It does not tell us what to believe, but invites us to see with our own eyes. The truth is that expansion of consciousness is not an achievement, but an unveiling. We do not become more, we remove the layers that prevent us from recognizing what we always were. Few venture into this path because it requires courage to dissolve the self that society has built. And yet, for those who dare, the journey opens to a grandeur beyond imagination. In the initial dimensions, consciousness is entangled with form, body, emotion, memory, and the restless architecture of the mind. Here, the human being identifies completely with what happens to them. Hunger feels like I am hungry. Anger becomes I am angry. Thoughts appear as truth rather than passing clouds. These dimensions shape the ego, the sense of I, that believes itself to be separate and solid. Osho reminds us that without understanding these foundational layers, one cannot transcend them. They are the soil from which awareness grows, yet they also become the prison in which most remain confined. As one begins to observe these dimensions instead of merging with them, a shift occurs. Experience is no longer the master, but becomes an object of contemplation. The individual realizes that emotions arise and fade, thoughts come and go, and the body itself is a temporary vessel. This realization marks the birth of the inner witness, the one who sees without becoming what is seen. The emergence of this witnessing is the first spiritual revolution. Suddenly, identity loosens, revealing space around experiences that once felt overwhelming or definitive. The later stages of these 6 dimensions introduce subtlety. Intuition appears. The heart becomes more open, and the mind begins to release its habitual grip. The ego, once rigid and defensive, becomes permeable. The individual starts to question the meaning of self, the origin of desire, and the purpose of suffering. Life is no longer merely a series of reactions, but a field of understanding. These dimensions represent the journey from unconsciousness toward self-mastery, from being a fragment lost in the world to becoming a centered presence capable of witnessing the entire play of existence. When the boundaries of the personal self begin to dissolve, consciousness rises into dimensions where the experience of being shifts from I am separate to I am part of the whole. These dimensions are infused with silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of internal conflict. In this silence, intuition becomes a natural intelligence, a sensitivity to life that does not depend on reasoning. Osho describes this stage as the flowering of awareness, where one perceives the world not through thoughts, but through pure presence. Here, the seeker no longer looks at reality. They participate in it as a conscious expression of existence. In these higher realms, compassion rises not as morality or duty, but as the spontaneous response of an open heart. One sees oneself in others, recognizing that all beings are manifestations of the same universal consciousness. The walls of fear begin to crumble, replaced by trust in the direction of life. The seeker discovers that existence is not chaotic, but profoundly intelligent, and that surrender to this intelligence brings profound peace. Meditation deepens, transforming from practice to state of being. As awareness continues to expand, perception becomes luminous. The world appears as it truly is, not fragmented but interconnected, not accidental but deeply harmonious. The seeker realizes that consciousness flows through everything: trees, rivers, stars, and the silence between breaths. This insight does not arise from philosophy, it arises from direct experience. One begins to live effortlessly, guided not by desire, but by the rhythm of existence itself. These dimensions reveal the vastness of human potential and the extraordinary beauty of an awakened heart. The last dimensions transcend all duality, dissolving even the sense of being a seeker. Here, the ego disappears completely, like a drop merging into the ocean. What remains is pure awareness and unbroken, timeless presence. Osho refers to this as the state of enlightenment, not as an attainment, but as the natural condition of consciousness when all illusions fall away. In these dimensions, there is no self, no other, no separation. The universe is experienced, not as something outside, but as one's own being in infinite expression. Language fails at this point, for these dimensions cannot be contained in words. They are not experiences, but states beyond experience, states where the experiencer is absent. The mind cannot comprehend this, for the mind depends on distinctions. Enlightenment, however, is the dissolution of all distinctions. It is the recognition that existence is one continuous field of awareness expressing itself in countless forms. In this state, there is no fear, no longing, no search. Everything simply is, and it is perfect. Those who touch these dimensions often describe them through metaphors: light, emptiness, vastness, or bliss, but even these are approximations. The truth of these dimensions can only be known by becoming them. In this ultimate dissolution, the seeker recognizes that awakening was never a journey toward something new, but a return to what has always been present, the eternal, unbounded essence of consciousness. This is the final flowering of human transformation, the moment where individuality dissolves into cosmic unity. Despite the profound potential encoded in human consciousness, very few people ever venture beyond the surface layers of being. Society conditions the individual to live outwardly, chasing achievements, possessions, and recognition, while ignoring the infinite depth within. Osho suggests that the primary reason people do not awaken is fear of silence, fear of emptiness, fear of losing the identity they have spent a lifetime constructing. Instead of entering the vastness within, most return to the familiar noise of the world, mistaking distraction for fulfillment. Moreover, the mind is programmed to cling to certainty, stability, and definition. Higher dimensions of consciousness demand the opposite: openness, fluidity, and surrender. This surrender feels like death to the ego, and so it resists with all its strength. The individual becomes trapped in repetition, living the same patterns endlessly while believing they are choosing freely. True understanding requires breaking this cycle, allowing awareness to penetrate the illusions that govern the mind. The truth that few understand is that awakening is not reserved for saints or mystics. It is the birthright of every human being. The door to these dimensions is always open, but it requires stepping beyond comfort, beyond conditioning, beyond the narrow sense of self. When one dares to enter this inner space, existence reveals its deepest secret. Consciousness is infinite, and we are that infinity temporarily experiencing itself through human form. To recognize this is to awaken, and to awaken is to live fully, fearlessly, and in harmony with the great mystery of being. In a profound paradox, we are born into form, yet we long for the formless. We inhabit boundaries, yet we sense an inner infinity pressing to break free. Osho often emphasized that true freedom does not arise from escaping limitations, but from understanding them so deeply that they no longer bind us. This paradox is not a contradiction, but a gateway. The human being stands at the intersection of matter and spirit, of earth and sky, and it is precisely this tension that generates the energy for awakening. Without limitation, there would be no longing for transcendence. Without struggle, there would be no growth. The paradox becomes the womb of transformation. As awareness deepens, one begins to see that limitations are not external forces imprisoning us, but internal constructs created by fear, conditioning, and identification with the ego. What we call bondage is often a misunderstanding of our own nature. Freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the capacity to remain untouched by them. It is an inner spaciousness that persists even in the midst of life's apparent restrictions. Osho teaches that when we witness the mind without judgment, when we allow thoughts, emotions, and experiences to arise and dissolve, the walls of limitation gradually become transparent. Instead of a cage, they become a mirror reflecting back the illusions we have mistaken for truth. The deeper mystery is that the paradox dissolves only when fully embraced. The ego seeks clarity, certainty, and rigid definitions, but consciousness expands only when we allow ambiguity, fluidity, and the unknown. This acceptance of paradox is the hallmark of spiritual maturity. One begins to see that life is not divided into opposites, but woven out of complementary polarities: light and shadow, sound and silence, form and emptiness. To awaken is not to choose one side of the polarity, but to recognize that both arise from the same source. In this recognition, the paradox becomes harmonious, and the seeker discovers a profound truth. Freedom is not something to be attained, but something to be realized within the very fabric of existence. After exploring the many layers of consciousness, the final step is not to transcend them, but to integrate them. Osho emphasizes that true awakening is not the rejection of the lower dimensions, but their transformation through awareness, the body, the emotions, the mind. These are not obstacles, but instruments. When enlightened consciousness flows through them, they become expressions of beauty, intelligence, and harmony. Integration means allowing each dimension to find its rightful place within the whole. It means living fully in the world without being of the world, maintaining inner stillness even while participating in life's dynamic play. The path of integration acknowledges that every dimension of consciousness carries a gift. The body gives grounding, the emotions give depth, the mind gives clarity, the heart gives compassion, and the higher dimensions give transcendence. Without integration, the seeker becomes lopsided, either to spiritual and detached from life, or to worldly and forgetful of the sacred. Osho warns that transcending the mind without embracing life leads to imbalance, while immersing oneself in life without awareness leads to unconsciousness. Integration is the art of weaving the earthly and the divine into a single tapestry, allowing the human and the cosmic to coexist without conflict. In this state of wholeness, the seeker becomes a bridge between dimensions. They can move fluidly from silence to action, from introspection to expression, from individuality to universality. Life becomes a dance rather than a struggle. Every moment is lived consciously, every gesture becomes meditation, every breath becomes prayer. Integration brings an effortless grace. One can laugh without reason, love without fear, and act without attachment to outcomes. This is the flowering of awakened humanity, where the individual self remains, but as a transparent window through which the infinite shines. Ultimately, integration reveals the highest truth. Enlightenment is not the escape from life, but the illumination of life from within. It is the recognition that all dimensions, high and low, are facets of the same jewel of consciousness. When the seeker embraces the totality of their being, the journey is complete, not because they have arrived somewhere, but because they have finally recognized that the entire journey was unfolding within the boundless space of their own awareness. In this realization, one lives not as a fragment, but as a whole, calm, radiant, and fully alive. Awareness is the silent alchemist within the human being, the unseen force that transforms confusion into clarity, fear into curiosity, and suffering into insight. Osho repeatedly emphasized that awareness is not something to be added to our being. It is already present as the core of who we are. What must be cultivated is the ability to remain present, to observe without attaching, to witness without interference. This witnessing is the great purifier. When we bring awareness to any inner phenomenon, anger, desire, sadness, thought, it begins to lose its unconscious hold. Awareness acts like light entering a dark room. It does not fight the darkness. It simply makes it disappear. This is the secret of inner alchemy. As awareness deepens, we discover that transformation cannot be forced. It unfolds naturally when we stop resisting what is. The mind wants control, but awareness simply observes. The ego wants change, but awareness welcomes things as they are. In this acceptance, a subtle relaxation occurs. Tension dissolves. The inner world becomes more spacious, less chaotic. Slowly, unconscious patterns begin to weaken, not through suppression, but through illumination. What once felt heavy and overwhelming becomes transparent. Awareness reveals that thoughts are not truths, emotions are not identities, and experiences are not the essence of who we are. This realization is the beginning of true freedom. At a deeper level, awareness becomes a flame that burns away the false. It uncovers the masks we wear, the stories we tell ourselves, and the illusions we cling to for security. This process can be unsettling, for the ego depends on these illusions to maintain its sense of identity. Yet it is only through this burning that authenticity emerges. Awareness strips away everything that is not essential, leaving behind a presence that is pure, luminous, and unconditioned. When awareness becomes continuous, life itself becomes meditation. Every action, every breath, every encounter becomes an opportunity to deepen into being. This is the alchemy Osho spoke of, the transformation of the human into the divine. Through the simple, profound power of consciousness, ultimately, awareness reveals that we are not the waves of the mind, but the ocean beneath them. We are not the clouds of emotion, but the sky that holds them. This shift from identification to witnessing is the essence of spiritual awakening. It marks the moment when the seeker stops searching outward and returns to the eternal presence. Within, through awareness, the inner world becomes transparent, the outer world becomes harmonious, and existence reveals itself as a continuous dance of energy, beauty, and mystery. Awareness is not a tool, it is the doorway to the infinite. When consciousness expands beyond personal identity, a profound shift occurs. The individual begins to perceive themselves not as an isolated being, but as a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. The universe is no longer experienced as something external, but as a living, pulsating presence of which we are an expression. Osho describes this state as the awakening of cosmic consciousness, a recognition that life is interconnected, interdependent, and woven together by an intelligence far greater than the human mind can comprehend. This perspective dissolves the illusion of separateness and reveals the unity underlying all forms. From this cosmic vantage point, the struggles of the ego appear small, almost dreamlike. The desires that once consumed us lose their urgency. The fears that once controlled us lose their power. The boundaries we drew around self begin to dissolve, replaced by a sense of belonging to something immeasurable. The individual experiences themselves as both a unique expression of existence and an inseparable part of the whole. This dual realization brings deep peace. One is free to be themselves fully, knowing that they are supported by the entire cosmos. Simultaneously, one becomes humble, recognizing that they are a single note in an infinite symphony. With cosmic awareness comes a profound sense of responsibility, not moral or imposed, but arising naturally from interconnectedness. One begins to act not from personal desire, but from harmony with a larger flow. Compassion expands. Understanding deepens. There is a recognition that every being, every tree, every star participates in the same universal dance. This perspective transforms how we live, how we love, and how we relate to the world. Conflict loses its appeal. Cooperation becomes instinctive. The seeker becomes a conscious participant in the evolution of life itself, in its deepest expression. The cosmic perspective reveals that existence is not a mechanical system, but a living mystery. Every event, every encounter, every breath is part of a vast unfolding with infinite depth. The universe becomes a mirror reflecting the inner cosmos, and the inner cosmos becomes a doorway to the infinite. Humanity's true place is neither superior nor insignificant. We are the bridge through which existence becomes self-aware. When we awaken to this truth, life transforms into a sacred journey, a celebration of being, a recognition of unity, and a profound participation in the divine play of existence. Of consciousness ultimately brings the seeker face to face with the most formidable threshold of all, the dissolution of the ego. This dissolution is not destruction, but transformation and unmasking of the false self that has been constructed through years of conditioning, fear, and identification. Osho teaches that the ego is a fragile illusion, a temporary structure that helps us navigate the physical world, but becomes a prison. When mistaken for our true identity, as awareness deepens, the walls of this inner prison begin to crack. Thoughts lose their authority, desires lose their urgency, and the familiar voice of the ego grows faint. What replaces it is not chaos, as the ego fears, but spaciousness and inner sky without center or boundary. Yet the approach to ego dissolution can feel terrifying, for the ego interprets this expansion as death. It clings desperately to its narratives, my name, my history, my achievements, my wounds. These stories give it a sense of solidity, even though they are nothing more than memories and interpretations. When the seeker begins to detach from these stories, the ego panics, for it senses its impermanence. This moment requires immense courage, the courage to let go of everything known, everything familiar, everything that has ever defined me. To meet this void is to step into the unknown, without guarantees, without maps, without a self to cling to, and yet, paradoxically, This moment of surrender becomes the gateway to the most profound liberation. In the depth of this void, one discovers that nothing essential is lost. What dissolves is only the illusion of separateness. The seeker realizes that the ego was never the true I. It was merely a shadow cast by the mind. When this shadow disappears, what remains is pure awareness, silent, luminous, expansive. One is no longer a fragment, but the totality. There is no sense of I am this or I am that. There is only I am, a simple yet boundless presence that contains all of existence. This dissolution marks the end of fear, for fear can exist only as long as there is something to protect. When the ego dissolves, there is nothing left that can be harmed, and thus fear becomes impossible. From this state emerges a new way of living, open, spontaneous, effortless. Without the burden of ego, actions flow naturally, love arises without condition, and life unfolds without conflict. The seeker becomes a transparent vessel through which existence expresses itself freely. This is why Osho calls ego dissolution the highest form of freedom. It liberates us not from the world, but from the limitations we impose upon ourselves. In this freedom, one discovers a truth so simple and yet so profound that it transforms everything. The self we spend our lives protecting never truly existed, and the presence we spend our lives searching for was always here, silently watching from within.